there comes a silence not born of emptiness, but of awakening, a stirring beneath the flesh where the soul begins to remember. The world may still whirl, but the axis shifts inward. Pain no longer screams, it whispers secrets of the self. And the darkness becomes a womb, not a tomb. There comes a moment in every true transformation when the wound, long silenced by shame and hidden beneath layers of armor, begins to whisper instead of weep. It no longer cries for pity, it speaks in the voice of an elder. What once was raw, aching, and unbearable becomes strangely holy. There is alchemy at work here, not of gold, but of soul. For suffering, when endured without collapse, ripens into meaning. The wound is not the enemy. It is the gate. It is the passageway through which the deeper self is born. And yet, most flee from it, try to heal it too quickly, or bury it beneath false smiles and hurried lives. But the soul does not forget. The unconscious keeps perfect record, not as a judge, but as a guardian of the sacred truth you were meant to uncover. It is only when we sit still long enough, in the dark, in the pain, in the haunting echoes of our own unmet longings, that the wound begins to shift. At first, it may still sting, but then it begins to teach. It tells stories not of the past, but of patterns. It reveals the blueprint of your becoming. And suddenly, what once felt like a punishment begins to resemble a prophecy. This is the strange paradox of the psyche, that the very place we broke becomes the ground where light enters. That the grief we once feared would drown us now reveals the soul's deeper voice. Not the voice of the ego, loud, restless, and always demanding answers, but the voice of the self, quiet, steady, eternal. It speaks not in sentences, but in symbols, not in logic, but in resonance. And it tells you this pain was not meaningless. It was a messenger. To allow the wound to speak is to give it dignity, to step beyond victimhood into initiation. For only those who have bled can understand the language of the soul. And those who understand it are no longer afraid of their darkness. They have made a home there. So if you find that your sorrow no longer begs for rescue, but offers wisdom in its stead, if your H begins to illuminate rather than destroy, then you are not broken. You are awakening. You are remembering that the path was never meant to be painless, only meaningful. And your wound, long silenced, is not a flaw, it is a sacred voice. The soul speaking in scars. There comes a silence so ancient it breathes beneath all masks. It does not arrive with thunder. It creeps in softly in dreams, in conflicts, in strange feelings we cannot name. And often, it wears the face of what we most fear. This is the shadow, not a demon to destroy, but a mirror long avoided. A mirror that does not flatter. A mirror that burns with truth. We have been taught to exile it, to name it evil, to chain it beneath the floorboards of our personality, hidden behind achievements, politeness, and applause. But the psyche rebels in silence. What we repress does not vanish, it waits. It waits for the hour when the ego, exhausted from performance, begins to crack. And in that crack, the shadow enters not to conquer, but to confront. It speaks a different language. It does not speak of what you show the world. It speaks of what you hide, your envy, your rage, your pride, your fear, your lust, your grief. Not to shame you, but to show you the full map of your humanity. For how can you ever become whole if you deny half of what you are? The shadow does not destroy. It demands recognition. It wants integration, not obedience. It wants you to kneel not in fear, but in humility, to say, I see you, you are also me. And when you do, something strange happens. Power returns, energy unblocks. The same force that once sabotaged you now strengthens you, because what is reclaimed becomes sacred. The enemy was never the shadow. The enemy was your unwillingness to look, your desire to be only light. But the soul was forged in both, in day and night, in ascent and descent, in halo and horn. And the shadow knows this. It is not against you. It is the part of you that was unloved, unheld, misunderstood. When you listen to it, you begin to feel not shame but compassion, not fear but awe. The great journey of transformation begins when the hero sits at the feet of the monster and listens. And the monster, long dismissed, begins to weep, because finally it is being seen. If the shadow no longer frightens you but teaches you, you have begun the true work, the sacred descent, the journey not of escape, but of union. You are no longer at war with yourself, and in that stillness, something ancient awakens. The self, vast, whole, and untouched by time. Let the shadow speak, let it guide, let it show you where you fractured and where you forgot. And you will find the enemy you feared was only your own unloved face, waiting to come home. There comes a moment in the soul's journey, quiet and without warning, when the face you once wore begins to fall away. It does not shout, it does not beg. It simply loosens like an old skin no longer yours. The mask you called self begins to crack, and behind it something vast stirs, nameless, ancient, waiting. We are taught to cling to identity, to fight for who we've been, to hold the line, to say, this is me, this is what I do, this is who I am. But the psyche does not honor such rigidity. It grows in spirals, it expands in silence, and every expansion begins with a small death, the death of certainty, the death of reputation, the death of stories we told ourselves to feel safe. And it feels, at first, like losing the ground beneath you, a drifting, a rupture. But not all falling is failure, some is transformation. To feel the death of who you were and not resist is to trust something deeper than ego. It is to say yes to the alchemy of becoming, the fire that burns only what no longer serves. This death is sacred. It is not the end of life, but the end of illusion. And so much of what we cling to is illusion. Identities built from fear, dreams shaped by the need to be seen, choices made to avoid the abyss. But when the self begins to awaken, these false skins must fall. Not as punishment, but as liberation. Grief comes, of course. We mourn even the masks that suffocated us because they were familiar. We grieve the smaller self as it dissolves. But in that grief, a deeper joy arises. A strange peace, the kind that whispers, you are not that story. You are not that name. You are not that wound. You are something older, something timeless, moving now toward wholeness. This is the rite of passage not marked by rituals or applause. It happens in the night, in silence, in the unseen corridors of the soul. And when you do not resist it, when you let the old self crumble, you begin to feel something extraordinary: space. Not emptiness, but sacred space. The kind that allows the true self to breathe. Not the self you perform, but the one you've buried beneath years of survival. To let who you were die is not to disappear. It is to be born again and again, into deeper authenticity, into a truth that does not bend to approval or fear. When the death comes, bow to it. Do not run, do not numb. Let it break you gently. Let it empty your hands so the soul can fill them again. Not with what you wanted, but with what you truly are. Only through such deaths do we become whole. Only through surrender does the eternal in us awaken and rise. There is a kind of exhaustion the soul reaches when the mind has wandered too far into the realm of explanations, when every question of meaning becomes a labyrinth with no center. You chase answers as though they were lanterns in the dark, only to find they flicker out as soon as you draw near. The intellect, sharp as it may be, cannot quench the thirst that rises from the depths of being. At first we search, we read, we climb the staircases of thought, We dissect our experiences like ancient scrolls, desperate to decode the hidden message. What does this mean? Why did this happen? What is the purpose? We become pilgrims in the desert of meaning, bones dry from too many metaphors and too little water. But then something shifts, not in the outer world, but within the sacred architecture of the psyche. A silence opens. You begin to feel that perhaps the meaning you sought was never out there. Perhaps the searching itself was the veil, and beneath that veil breathes presence. Presence does not shout, it does not explain, it simply is. You no longer chase the horizon, you let it arrive. And in that stillness, something ancient and alive begins to take root. You taste your coffee not as an act, but as a sacred event. You watch the light fall through the window as though it were speaking. You sit in the ache of being human and find it beautiful. The frantic quest for purpose becomes a quiet reunion with now. This is not passivity. It is the deepest form of engagement. It is the soul saying, I am here. I have always been here. And you realize that the question was never, what is the meaning of life? But rather, can I be present to it as it is? The mind will protest. It will reach again for answers, for frameworks, for doctrines. But the soul only longs for intimacy with the moment. And so you begin to notice the wind through the leaves, the sound of your own breath, the quiet sadness that visits at twilight, not as distractions from the path, but as the path itself. Meaning does not descend from the heavens. It rises from presence, from the sacredness of being fully awake in the ordinary. You become less interested in defining your life and more devoted to living it, wholly, consciously, tenderly. And in that shift, the mystery no longer frightens you. It humbles you, it softens you, it calls you deeper. The search for meaning was a seed, but presence is the flower. It does not need to explain its beauty. It only needs the sun. There comes a time when the silence you once feared becomes a sanctuary, and the solitude that once echoed with absence begins to whisper of return. Not the return of another, not the appearance of a lover or friend, but the homecoming of something far older, your own soul. We are taught to flee aloneness, to escape into noise, into conversations that never touch the heart, into rooms crowded with the laughter of strangers but empty of presence. Solitude is painted as exile, as if to be alone is to be forgotten, as if silence were punishment, but the soul has no fear of solitude. It is the ego that trembles in the stillness, because in the absence of distraction, its illusions grow thin. It is in solitude that the masks slip, the performances fade, and the mirror grows honest. At first, it aches. You feel the weight of everything you have avoided, all the words unsaid, the emotions denied, the fears buried beneath busy days. But stay. Do not run. There is a door beneath the ache, and through it a garden. You begin to feel something ancient moving within you, something quiet and watchful, a presence you thought you had lost long ago, perhaps in childhood, perhaps in trauma, perhaps in the constant race to become someone. But in the stillness it returns, and suddenly solitude does not feel empty, it feels full, brimming, alive. You walk in your own company as you would walk beside a beloved, listening, honoring, attending to the soft murmurings of the heart. You remember how to breathe without effort, how to sit without agenda, how to exist without proving. It is in this space that the soul begins to speak. Not in loud declarations, but in symbols, in feelings, in the subtle shifts of energy that move like wind across water. You begin to know yourself, not as an idea, not as a collection of labels or roles, but as a living mystery unfolding. And you realize that solitude is not punishment, it is invitation. An invitation to meet yourself, not the self that others see, not the persona curated for approval, but the true self, the eternal one, who has always waited patiently behind the curtain. In solitude, you are not alone. You are reunited with your essence, with your depth, with the divine that lives in the quiet center of your being. It is here that healing begins, not in fixing, not in striving, but in being, in presence, in reverent self-regard. You do not need to escape yourself to be whole. You only need to return. And when you do, solitude becomes not a place of exile, but of communion, a sacred room where the soul lights candles and whispers, "Welcome home." There comes a moment in the quiet dark of night when the mind no longer spins tales, but sinks into symbols, where the dream ceases to be narrative and becomes a revelation, a temple without walls. A whisper from the soul. We are conditioned to seek logic, to assemble meaning like a puzzle, story by story, scene by scene. But the unconscious is not a playwright. It is a mirror of eternity, and eternity does not explain itself, it shows. A lion standing in your hallway, a clock melting into water, a child carrying a lantern through your childhood home. These are not dreams to be read as stories. They are not to be decoded like puzzles. They are living fragments of something older than time, the language of the psyche, carved in symbol and shadow. To dream in symbols is to be visited by the gods within. The archetypes, the primal forces that animate us all, they do not come with names but with presence, with image, with resonance. You awaken not with a plot but with a feeling, a haunting, a weight in the chest, a stirring in the belly. Something sacred has touched you and left no explanation. Do not rush to interpret. Do not imprison the symbol in words too soon. Let it breathe. Let it unfold within you like a seed in soil. Symbols are not answers. They are openings. They break you not to destroy but to reveal. When your dreams grow symbols instead of stories, it is a sign that you are descending into the deeper layers of the soul. You are no longer chasing meaning with the rational mind. You are allowing meaning to find you, to pierce you, to rearrange you from within. It is a sacred disorientation, a dissolving of the ego's grip. The linear mind grows quiet, and something older, something wild and true begins to stir. This is the language of the soul. It is not efficient, it is not clear, it does not offer neat conclusions, but it is real, it is alive, and it is yours. To dream in symbol is to be led, not by force, but by feeling. It is to walk through your inner forest not with a map, but with a torch, to trust the flickering flame of intuition. Even when reason falters, the psyche speaks in image because truth is not always speakable. Some truths are too vast, too sacred for words. They must be seen with the inward eye, held in the silence of the heart. So when your dreams grow symbols instead of stories, be still. Something is awakening, something beyond understanding, something that longs not to be solved, but to be seen. And if you listen, not with your ears, but with your soul, you may just remember who you were before the world taught you to forget. There comes a moment along the inner path when the masquerade grows heavy and the soul aches not for applause, but for reflection. A moment when connection is no longer built upon performance, but presence. When the eyes do not scan for acceptance, but for recognition, the ancient kind. Most of us enter the world adorned in masks, not out of deception, but out of survival. We learn early that love often demands a costume, that to be seen is dangerous, and to be known is even more so. So we smile when we're breaking. We nod when we disagree. We shrink to fit, not because we are small, but because we fear the cost of being large. But then something shifts. We grow tired of echo chambers, of praise that cannot touch the soul, of being celebrated for a self that isn't real. And so the mask begins to crack, not in shame, but in longing. a longing to meet and be met soul to soul. And here the mirror appears, not in glass, but in people, in encounters, in the ones who hold space, not judgment, who do not try to fix you or define you, but simply reflect you softly, silently, truthfully. You begin to see them. These mirrors disguised as others. You begin to speak, not to be impressive, but to be understood. You begin to listen, not to respond, but to receive. There is no game to win, no mask to maintain, just presence, raw, unearned, whole, and strangely in their reflection you begin to see yourself more clearly. The forgotten child, the hidden rage, the sacred vulnerability that once felt like weakness, now feels like truth. You begin to understand that love does not bloom in perfection. It blooms in authenticity, in showing the wound, not the armor, in saying, "This is me flawed, feeling, becoming," and watching someone say, without words, "I see you." It is a quiet miracle to meet another without masks, to find a gaze that does not judge, but joins, to realize that you are not alone in your strangeness, that beneath every mask lies a soul equally afraid, equally longing, equally divine. And the more you live from that place, the more mirrors you meet, not because the world has changed, but because you have. The vibration of truth calls truth. The frequency of soul finds soul. The mask, once your shield, now feels like a prison. You remove it gently, not with rebellion, but with reverence. You are ready not to impress, but to be known. So let the mirrors find you. Let them show you your light and your shadow. Let them reflect the beauty you forgot, the wounds you carried, the self you hid. And when you see them, those mirrors in human form, do not look away. Bow. And remember, you were never meant to wear a mask forever. You were meant to be seen. There comes a sacred hour, not marked by the clocks of men, but by the slow turning of the inner wheel, when suffering, long resisted and exiled, steps forward not as a tormentor, but as a guide. This is the moment when the soul no longer flees, when the instinct to numb, distract, or escape softens, and in its place, a quiet willingness arises to stay, to listen, to allow the pain to speak not as a curse, but as a message written in ancient script, forgotten in the caverns of the unconscious. For what we resist persists, and what we exile returns in dreams, in moods, in the unexplainable ache behind the eyes. Suffering buried is never gone. It becomes shadow, not evil, but estranged. And like any abandoned child, it does not vanish, it waits. To integrate suffering is not to celebrate it, nor to romanticize it. It is to honor it as part of the whole, a thread in the tapestry of your becoming. It is to touch the wound without recoiling, to ask it not, "Why have you come?" but, "What have you come to teach me?" Pain, when met with presence, becomes a portal. It does not ask for solutions. It asks for sincerity, for courage, for the slow, sacred descent into the valley where the ego dare not go. But the soul longs to return. You begin to see that your suffering has a shape, a voice, a myth of its own. It carries symbols. It remembers what the conscious mind forgot. It speaks of ancestral patterns, of childhood echoes, of unlived lives and unshed tears. When you stop running and turn toward it, the chase ends, and something astonishing occurs. The suffering begins to soften, not because it vanishes, but because it has been seen. It is in this gaze, honest, unblinking, compassionate, that suffering changes form. It ceases to demand escape and instead asks for meaning, for embodiment, for integration. This is the alchemy of the soul. You do not erase your pain. You digest it. You become larger than it, not by denial, but by inclusion. And in that inclusion you find a strange and holy peace. The peace that comes not from absence of sorrow, but from presence within it. You begin to carry your suffering not as a burden, but as a teacher. a symbol of your becoming, a reminder that you are deeper than joy alone, that within you lies the vast cathedral where all your experiences are welcome. And in that sacred place, something eternal stirs. You are not broken. You are becoming whole. And so, we return, not to where we began, but to who we truly are beneath the masks and forgotten dreams. The journey inward is never loud, it unfolds in silence, in symbols, in the slow unraveling of all we thought we had to be. But in that sacred unraveling, something eternal awakens. The soul remembers. The self, once scattered in shadows and longing, begins to gather whole, wounded, luminous. There is no final arrival, only deeper presence, deeper truth. And perhaps, in the stillness between one breath and the next, you will feel it, the quiet knowing that everything you sought was never outside of you. It was always the echo of your own becoming, calling you home.